The month of June was a very active month for game acquisitions and plays, so let's get right to it! There were two primary reasons that I acquired a few games this month, and one of those reasons was I managed to acquire some used games. One of those games, called Via Nebula, was acquired through a Board Game Geek auction from a Canadian seller, so I didn't have to pay for cross-border shipping and US prices and all that. So I was able to acquire this used game at quite a reasonable price. Honestly, it's the physical components that really got me with this one. And when I looked up how easy it was to acquire through regular channels, I discovered that the game is out of print and is actually quite hard to find, and the prices it's selling at are quite high, so I thought, well, I might as well jump on the chance to get this at a fairly cheap price and see how it is. And exactly how it is something I'm going to talk about in a few minutes when I talk about my games played. The other source of used games was actually my primary gaming opponent outside of my own family here. Much like myself, she's decided to really cull her collection and sell off a whole ton of her games. So I was able to restrain myself and just get 3 of them, 2 of which are primarily for the kids. So the one game I got to play as a family is Doodle Quest, and I did manage to play it, so again I'm going to come back and talk about that in a few minutes. Another game I got more as a future play with the kids is Champions of Midgard. I have played this one a couple of times in the past. In fact, when I looked it up, I discovered that I'd previously owned it, which I didn't remember at all. But I do remember playing it and thinking that it was a decent game. Obviously not one that really thrilled me enough to hang on to the game, but as a worker placement game with some interesting stuff going on, I thought it would be one that my kids could get into in the next year or two at least. And I've heard that the 2 expansions that are out for it really add some interesting things to the game, and I have only played the basic game, so I am curious to maybe eventually add those to the collection as well. And then I have my other used game purchase is Court of the Medici, which interestingly enough was a game that for whatever reason I had just been reading about on Board Game Geek, and what I read made it sound like a very fascinating little game that really rewards 2 people exploring the game together and discovering its strategies. On the surface, it's a very simple appearing, just really tiny little card game, but there is apparently a lot of strategic depth to discover as you explore and get to know the game. So whether that actually happens or not remains to be seen. I'm not really sure if it's my wife's type of game, to be honest with you, or even mine for that matter. It's kind of a fairly simple numbers-y kind of, how do you even describe it? I wanted to say trick-taking, but that's not it at all. It's a unique game, let's just put it at that, and maybe I'll give it a shot sometime and see how it goes. So I said there were 2 reasons that I had picked up a few games this month, one of which was the purchases of used games. The other was the fact that I finally spent my birthday gift certificate and picked up a couple of things. So the board game I picked up is called Naga Raja, and it was a bit of an impulse purchase. Again, it was one that I had just recently discovered and read about, and when I was in the board game store, I saw it there and thought I would use my gift certificate to purchase it. Now, the main reason I did was because it is co-designed by one of my favorite game designers, Bruno Cathala, who does most of his designs with another designer. But Bruno Cathala tends to create games that are right in my wheelhouse of games that I love, which are these 2-player, very easy to learn yet very tactical, but with some luck thrown in there. 2-player games that are often asymmetrical. In this case, players start with generally the same stuff, so it's not asymmetrical per se, but it is one of his games that is quick to get into, but offers a lot of interesting tactical choices. So I'm going to talk about it more in a second again, but Naga Raja is one that I picked up. And then I spent the rest of my gift certificate on more sealed magic cards. As I'm learning a little more about the game of Magic and learning more about the sets that have come out over the years, I'm discovering that each of the major sets has been built around a specific thematic umbrella, I guess you would say. So when I found out there was a set that was all about pirates and dinosaurs, that was Ixalan, I believe, I was like, oh, I gotta get a few Ixalan packs and make a dinosaur deck and a pirate deck. And then there was the one about the Greek gods and such. I'm going to have to put the name of it in the written description here because I don't remember what it was off the top of my head. But basically I was like, I got to branch out from War of the Spark, which is basically the set that was introduced as soon as I started to get into the game. And I thought, I got to get some of these older packs and see what cards I can come up with to add to my decks. And of course, that led to me doing a whole bunch more deck building. I basically took the 7 decks that I had carefully built over the previous month or two, just tore them all apart, and added in all my new cards, and then designed each individual deck around a very specific theme. So I did end up building my Pirates deck, which has a lot of gaining treasure chests and the mana they provide. I have a deck that's elves in the natural forest and proliferation of natural elements, and so each of my decks has an interesting, unique theme that is built around and a kind of a core mechanism or two to go along with that. So it was very fun once again to be back to the deck building and see what I could come up with. So I'm going to talk more about that when I talk about my games played, which I'm going to do right about now because that is it for my new acquisitions for the month. It would sure be nice to have a sponsor to put in this little gap between my games acquired and games played, wouldn't it? Anyways, this is brought to you for free! Please leave me a like and subscribe! So, games played. The games I played with my kids were mostly games we played before, so we'll run through those pretty quickly, and then when I get to the games I played with my adult friends, almost everything was new to me this month, so we'll get to that in a moment. But first, in terms of what I played with my kids, I finally, with my 9-year-old, got back to Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle, and we played what is now, I think, the 2nd adventure in the game. I don't think we've hit the 3rd one yet, but the 2nd one added some more interesting things, and we'll see how that progresses. I just heard on a podcast today that the podcaster felt that this game eventually got quite bloated and sort of outstayed its welcome as things were unlocked from books 1 through book 7. So we'll see how it goes. So far we're having fun with it, and we already did a fairly big jump in terms of the stuff that was added to the game. Not so much the mechanisms, but the content that was added between the 1st and the 2nd books here. So moving along to another familiar one. We have Hero Kids, our little print and play kids RPG. We printed off and crafted another scenario adventure for Hero Kids, and again had a lot of fun with it. The kids came up with a really great creative solution to one of the problems that was presented in this particular adventure, which was a lot of fun to play out. My 7-year-old in particular has a ton of fun coloring all the black and white characters that we print out for each adventure before we actually end up playing it. That's a bit of fun in addition to the enjoyment we get out of playing the game. Now, from Hero Kids, we go to Zombie Kids, which I think has been on this list every month since I started doing these little monthly game videos. And again, it's been a hit. We've had fun with it. We ended up trying a 3-player game with myself and the 2 kids, and we ended up getting beaten pretty badly. So it doesn't seem to scale quite as well from 3 to 4 players because they play on the same map. Whereas if you're playing only with 2, apparently you flip the board to the other side of the map and it creates a bit more ease of movement in terms of more pathways on the board. So there's not really scaling between 3 and 4 players, but there is for 2 players versus 3 and 4. So a lot of fun still with Hero Kids. There was one evening where I pulled a few of my kids' games off the shelf and gave each of my kids an option to pick one of the games to play. And one of the games I had pulled off was Cartagena. And I was thinking at the time that if this was not chosen by one of the kids to be played, I might add it to my games to sell pile because it's not one that we really pull out very frequently. But much to my surprise, my 7-year-old did pick this one to play, and this is an old classic. It's a very simple, straightforward race game, but is done in an interesting way with the card play, and we did have fun with the 3 of us with that one. And as I talk about this, I'm trying to remember which game my 9-year-old picked that evening. I'm not sure if I actually recorded that. Might have been Dungeon Mayhem again, but I'm not exactly sure. Another one that the three of us got to was one of my 7-year-old's favorite games, which is the cooperative game Castle Panic. And we have the Wizard's Tower expansion for this, so we've kind of mixed in some of those elements with the base game elements. And it's one that we have a lot of fun playing together, trying to prevent our castle being overrun by monsters. And it is a great co-op experience. One of the nice things about it is I can customize the game to make it a little bit shorter than it's supposed to be, and also a little easier than it's supposed to be, so that we can knock off a game with the three of us relatively quickly. Otherwise it does kind of drag on a bit in terms of holding my kids' attention spans, and mine too, to be honest. But this is a game that is quite enjoyed by all of us. And then finally, the last one I played with my kids, I have a physical copy of, which is King and Assassins, although we ended up playing this on my computer because I have a PC version that I purchased through Steam that's really well done. So this is a very simple asymmetrical two-player game where one player plays as the king and is trying to get safely to his castle without being assassinated by the townsfolk, who are played by the other player. And amongst the townsfolk are three secret assassins that the king does not know who they are, but they are there amongst the crowd trying to get at the king and assassinate him before his guards can get him safely back to the castle. So it's a pretty straightforward action point usage type of game, and because it's really well done on the computer, it takes away some of the tracking of the action points and makes it fairly easy for my kids to play with me. So they enjoy taking turns with me on the computer. Now I will say that playing as the assassin player is much easier in this game, and so often I'll allow my kids to play as the assassins while I play the king role, because if I allow them to be the king, it becomes pretty much an impossible task for them to get anywhere close to winning. But it is kind of nice that that sort of imbalance is there, because it allows us to play slightly more competitively together. And then the last one with the kids, did I say that was the last one? And then finally, the last one I played with my kids, I have a physical copy of, which is King and Assassin. I don't know, but there is one more here. And that is Doodle Quest that we just purchased from my friend. And this is one of those games where every player has a sort of clear plastic sheet and a dry erase marker, and there are a whole bunch of different sheets with different illustrations on them that presents a different challenge that the player has to draw on their own clear sheet and then overlay onto the level to see how well they did in terms of the points they scored. So we've only just got this game, but we've already played it a bunch and had quite a lot of fun with it. It's one of those things that's pretty fun for the adults as well as for the kids, although it'd be nice to come up with a way to challenge the adults a little better. But at the end of the day, the score with this type of game isn't really what matters, because it's just a pretty fun activity, although try telling that to a 9-year-old. Okay, slide over here before I get buried by all the games here, and jump into the games played with the adults. So I'll start with Magic here. And I've continued to play my weekly games of Magic with my friend. Unfortunately, this past week he was out of town, so we didn't get our weekly game in for maybe the first time since we started doing our weekly thing. Maybe our second, but I didn't get my Magic fix this past week, so I'm anxious to get back to it this week. Though we did make up for that a few weeks ago because he had some vacation time. So instead of our normal lunchtime hour where we get maybe 2 games in, we actually had a whole day where we could sort of play around with some drafts. And it was actually my first time trying a draft format. In looking around on the internet before playing, I learned that there's some really interesting ways that you can do a draft for 2 players. And then with our most recent lunch hour play a couple of weeks ago, I got to try some of my new decks that I had just most recently made. My friend was kind enough to play a couple of them while I played a couple as well. And so I had a lot of fun exploring my new themed decks and getting some ideas of how they could maybe be tweaked slightly. I'm definitely learning about the challenges of good deck building as I experiment with this process. It is quite a fun challenge. Next up, I was also quite happy to get to try my new game, Naga Raja. So I played it first with my wife, and then on another occasion with my gaming friend from whom I've purchased these games, and I had a lot of fun with this game. It's just another Katala design that is just so interestingly done. Now, the only thing I would say negatively about it, it does have some sort of direct screwage where, although both players are playing in separate temples. They have their own play area. You can play cards that directly mess with what your opponent is trying to do. And I did find that I avoided playing cards in that manner, because the other nice thing is that cards have sort of dual purposes. You can use them for those actions, or you can use them to roll these fate sticks, which are a really interesting alternative to dice. Basically, they're these four-sided sticks that each have different symbols on them, and you sort of roll them together and toss them on the table as you roll. But I found I was sort of intentionally avoiding these nasty effects on the cards. Other than that, it turned out to be a really interesting mix of luck as you were sort of turning up tiles and rolling your fate sticks, and the tactics of how to deal with that situation and manage your cards. This one was a definite winner for me, and I'm glad I picked it up. I did get to play another of the new ones here, which is via Nebula. I played that 3 players with my wife and I and the same friend, and it turns out it is a very light, rules-wise, almost train-like game, where instead of building routes of train tracks across the land, you're sort of building routes of clearing the fog so that you can deliver goods to cities and use those goods to build buildings. I was quite pleased to discover that, other than being a very beautifully produced game, a very visually interesting game, is also a lot of fun to play. So despite being very simple and quite light rules-wise, it is a very wide open game and leaves a lot up to the players who decide how they're going to make the game play out. The other interesting thing about it is that the actions players take kind of directly benefit everybody, so that when you uncover some new resources, those resources are available to be taken by everybody. When you build a path through that fog, that path can be used by anybody to deliver resources. So the things that you're doing on the game board are things that all players can use. So there's direct competition in that manner for when somebody makes something available, everyone's trying to reach to grab their own piece of it. So this is a light enough game where my kids could almost be at the point where they might be able to play that, although the open-endedness of the game I think makes it a little bit more difficult for a kid to kind of jump in and play it. Mainly because I'm such a sucker for beautiful components and the aesthetics of the game. I'm just quite pleased that the game is fun to play in addition to fun to look at. We did play one more game the same evening with the 3 of us, and that game was, once again, the Quest for El Dorado with the Heroes and Hexes expansion that we had kind of tried previously. Now, the previous time that we had played it, I had only used a small part of that Heroes and Hexes expansion because of a worry that it would add too many negative effects to what was kind of a light and fun race game. However, when we did play it that way, it seemed that the Hexes portion of it might not be too bad after all. So we played the expansion in the proper manner, only changing a couple of things that were directly screwing other players. But other than that, we left everything as is and found it to be just a really fun experience. It actually works really well, and the fears I had about it weren't necessarily founded, I don't think. It wasn't too difficult to deal with the hexes, but they provided enough of a barrier that it was an interesting choice whether to kind of take a shortcut and acquire the hexes or sort of take the more difficult route to avoid them. So that element of the game was an interesting part to it that I thought kind of enhanced the overall base game. And then the very last game we ended up playing as a 4-player game was Camel Up, the 2nd edition. This is one that I had acquired in May, and I was glad that we got a chance to get it to the table. Like I had said previously, we had in the past owned the 1st edition of Camel Up, and I really liked the kind of small tweak they added to Camel Up in the 2nd edition, where you have those 2 camels that are running around the racetrack in the opposite direction, potentially pulling people the wrong way and further messing with the overall results of the race. So it does add more chaos. Somebody who wants a lot of control and more certainty with the bets that they are placing isn't necessarily going to enjoy that very much. But the game being what it is, which is just a really light and fun and funny game of betting on outcomes and hoping for the best, just kind of seeing what happens, it's really a fun addition, and they've really done well with the physical components with the 2nd edition as well. I'm really pleased with what they've done with this game overall, and we did have a lot of fun with it. So, to tie this in with my other videos about games I'm going to sell, I think I am going to end up keeping this Camel Up 2nd edition and probably selling Winner's Circle. So that was all the games played. In terms of what was new to me again, we had Naga Raja, which was the 2-player game that I enjoyed a lot. I hope I'll get to play that some more in the near future. We had Doodle Quest, which the kids have requested to play again on a couple of occasions, so we've had a ton of fun with Doodle Quest. The drafting formats with Magic the Gathering were sort of a new-to-me way to play the game, and they were fun to try for sure. At the end of the day, though, I don't want to just keep purchasing booster packs and playing those kind of blind drafts. I end up having a lot more fun playing with the decks that I create myself, although I am glad I got to try a couple of different draft formats, because it was a lot of fun to try that as something new and different. Also new to me were via Nebula, that simple, beautiful game, which was a hit. Camel Up 2nd Edition, which got 2 thumbs up as well, and then the full proper Heroes and Hexes expansion for the Quest for El Dorado, which ended up being better than I had expected. So overall, June was a pretty good month for gaming. How about you? What have you been playing recently? Anything new and exciting? I'm always interested to hear that. Hey, it's Josh. Thank you so much for watching. If you wouldn't mind just crushing that like button, smashing that subscribe button, and chucking the link for this video with someone who you think would enjoy it, by golly, I would appreciate that. Cheers. Zoom check. The month of June was an especially active game. So I was able to acquire it. So we'll blow through those pretty quickly. So we'll run through. It's a fairly simple action point card select. Well, not really card selection. But we did have a. I'm gonna just start a. No. The whole having just a whole mix and that was once again the Quest for El Dorado with the Heroes and Hexes expansion that I'd sort of experimented with previously. I'm getting buried here. Let me move some games around. So overall, June was a great month on the gaming front. Let me know how your month has. So overall, June was a great month on the gaming front. Let me know how your. So overall, June was a great month for the gamings. So overall, June was a great month for gaming. So overall, June was a great. I'm so close to finishing this video, and I can't get it the last sentence right. Oh, it's too late at night.